Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel. Pardon me while I readjust myself here. So welcome if you are new here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the little bell, do all the good things. And I'm saying that before you've even watched my content. So if you're new here, hopefully you like me already. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in. This is a VR to Simon at the Hermit's Cave, the My First Tarot tag. So this actually came out a while ago. I am way late to the party, but I really wanted to talk about this because I feel like I owe that to my first deck. So I'm going to dive right in. If I have everything I need, I do. Okay, perfect. So some of you may have heard bits and pieces of this story before, but when I first encountered the tarot, it was because I was very active in a local pagan community. And many of the people in that community did tarot, and we occasionally would have these divination nights. So people would do readings, we would learn to read tea leaves, we would do all these kinds of things. And I think actually even before we had a official divination night, a good friend, who at the time was just an acquaintance, she became a good friend, gave me a really powerful tarot reading with the, it's collage-y, it's been around for forever. I want to say it's called like the Journey Tarot, but that's not right. It's going to bug me. I think I've done this on a video before. I always remember at the most inconvenient times and forget at the most inconvenient times. Somebody's going to be yelling at the screen right now. I just know it. It's collage. It's been around forever. It's still available. It's still in print. Voyager. The Voyager Tarot. And at the time, I actually thought it was maybe a Star Trek reference because that was the time. At least I think it was the time. But it wasn't Star Trek. It was a collage. And to me, the pictures were meaningless. I didn't know what any of that was. They looked cluttered and chaotic and messy. Totally not my jam. But got the most incredible tarot reading that turned out to be extremely accurate and really gave me insight into a very specific turning point in my life that set me on a course for a whole lot of personal growth. So I'd had that experience. I felt like you had to be like sort of qualified, I think, to be a tarot reader. I don't know what I thought at the time. Maybe I thought you were supposed to have attended classes or been taught by somebody important, or I don't know. I don't know what I thought, but it felt very unattainable. So as my curiosity grew and I started to realize it was more accessible than that, this was when I started going to divination nights and people would kind of trade readings and all that sort of thing. I started to get really curious, but I have a very sort of, in some ways I'm very right-brained, creative, kind of non-linear, and then in some ways I'm very left-brained and very linear and very black and white. And for whatever reason, I didn't really have a lot of interest in playing with the tarot until I heard a description. I can't remember who first told me this. I heard a description of how the tarot worked that just made sense to my more leftish brain and made it feel more tangible and possible. And that was that somebody said if you have, that your subconscious mind is super powerful. Now that was something I already believed because I had experience with lucid dreaming. I'd had other experiences and I was like, okay, I get that. I get how the subconscious mind is super powerful and we don't use much of that part of our brain. And somebody said that with the tarot, every single card, no matter how new or how old, has a unique feel to it. Your subconscious mind can pick up on the teeniest differences between each card. And so your brain sort of works behind the scenes when you're focusing on your question and pulls the cards that you need to the top so that you can get the messages that you need. Now the subconscious brain works very visually. That's something else that I understand and do believe. So that description or that explanation was the first one that I felt like I could dig my teeth into that sort of made it make sense. But I still wanted to believe that it worked if I was going to dive into it. So I found my first, and I should add a disclaimer in case I forget later. I might expand on this, but in case I forget later, how I feel about that whole subconscious mind thing, I think that's kind of, I don't necessarily think that that's really what I believe now. All I know now is that I know that it works, and I trust that it works. But in the beginning, that explanation gave me some reason why it could work, and that helped. But I think I'm much more open to the magic of it now in ways that I wasn't before, which is so funny. A lot of times we're the other way around. We start out lured in by the magic, and then over time we're like, oh, here's how it might work, and here's how it might work. Totally the opposite. I needed the reason first to even dive in. But then I was like, okay, I want my first tarot deck. And the one that spoke to me was the Osho Zen tarot, which this is I still have this is the exact copy, my first ever tarot. Excuse me. This one is trimmed. I do have an untrimmed copy, which I could have pulled out for you guys, but just imagine this black border goes all the way around. I liked the imagery, and at the time I was really drawn to the sort of more Eastern philosophy of this deck. It just felt like it might make it more accessible or easier to understand somehow, or easier to learn. And to be honest, things like the Rider-Waite-Smith felt very inaccessible and cerebral and difficult, and I don't know, I needed something that was going to speak on a level that would make sense to me, and just studying the tarot was not something, every video I drop something. I wanted something that, studying the tarot, that's what I was going to say. Studying the tarot was not something that was interesting to me at all at the time. I wanted the lazy way. I wanted imagery that spoke to me. I wanted to be able to make sense of the cards. So this one was the one that when I touched it and flipped through a copy at a local store was the one that I was like, yes, this is the one. In fact, I'm not even sure. I'm going to take that back. I'm not even sure back then you could really flip through decks. So I might have just bought this off the shelf based on the cover and what the back of the box said, because that's how you used to do it. You used to not be able to get your hands on sample decks. But regardless, brought this home. It came with a guidebook, which I read through from cover to cover and played with for a couple of weeks. I pulled cards and I would look up what they meant, and I'll talk more about the book in a second. But I needed to know that it worked, and I needed to know that it worked not just because I memorized a bunch of meanings, and so I threw the book away in the garbage. Like, just threw it away. Like, as an adult, that kind of just like makes me twitchy, because I'm like, God, I could have at least donated it or done something, but I just needed it away as quick as possible because I really wanted to test divination as a practice. I wanted to test my intuition. I wanted to just rip off the training wheels, because I know me and I could have become very reliant on the book. So I read it, I had used it for a couple of weeks, and then I got rid of it. And then I regretted it for like many years, because I was like, dang it, I don't want to buy a whole new copy of the deck just to get the book. But I missed the book because it had some great stories in it. And, sorry, I'm sidetracking. I'll get there. Anyways, so once I threw the book away, I had to rely on what little I could remember and then just trust what came through every time I would pull a card. And so it became this really wonderful experience where I got to befriend my intuition in a way I wouldn't have otherwise. Now, around the same time, I also picked up, and I should have grabbed them to show you guys, but you've seen them, the Soul Cards 1 and the Soul Cards 2 deck by Deborah Chapin, which are made with a type of art called touch art that is, for her, very intuitive and whatever. And those cards have no keywords, no predefined meanings. And so I worked with this deck, and I worked with Soul Cards, and that is it for years. And I gave some really powerful readings to friends and to family, and I did this a lot for a long time. And I got very comfortable with this deck. This deck is always going to be, to some degree, sort of home. I know this deck so well. I know it backwards and forwards. I know the art. I know, for the most part, without thinking about it now, what card in a traditional tarot that these correlate to. But that didn't really matter to me. Why do I keep pulling the Three of Cups? Okay, come on. Different art. That didn't really matter to me at the time that I first got this deck. What mattered to me was that the stories that I remembered, the way that I could tell a story with the artwork, those are the kinds of things that really stood out. And yeah, like, this is one of my favorites. It's one of the ones I think about the most. This is the the Knight of Pentacles in a traditional deck, but it's called Slowing Down in the Osho Zen. And it's like this whole tortoise versus the hare, like, idea. And it gives me just so much to work with. I just adore it. So I love this depiction of the Strength card, Courage. And it speaks of how the flower will find its way through the rock to bloom if it's determined and whatnot. There's so much. Anyway, love. Now, after I had worked with this for a long time, I finally acquired, this was around the time of smartphones, I eventually got the Osho Zen Tarot app for my phone, which has the full guidebook in it, and was able to revisit some of the stories. Like, I love this one too, Ripeness. This one is the Nine of Pentacles. And how perfect is that when we know what the traditional tarot means? But at the time I worked with this deck, I didn't know any of the traditional meanings. I just knew what I'd learned from this deck. In fact, the Celtic Cross that I learned was the 10 card spread from the guidebook that came with this deck, which I will share with you momentarily. Anyway, picked up the app, finally had access to the book again, and just recently, and by recently I mean like last month, like late last month, I don't know when I'm going to put this video up, I just realized. We'll see. But near the end of February, I found somebody locally who was selling off a like-new copy of this deck with the guidebook for like $8 Canadian, which is ridiculous. So I drove out, they were like a half an hour away from me, and we drove out, maybe longer. They might have been like an hour away. Anyways, we bolted out there and picked it up same day because finally, I have the guidebook back. Now, there is another book that goes with this deck called Tarot in the Spirit of Osho, but it is a deeper, more like meditative exploration of the cards. It's not the original. And what I love the most about this original guidebook is that when you open up to every single card, you get a commentary, and you get a little bit of, like, this is the major arcana. You get commentary, you get a little bit of Zen wisdom with each one. And then when you get into the minors, it's kind of the same thing. But what I find is that the commentary gives you the story behind the artwork, which is, I think a lot of these stories are really beautiful and punchy and get the meaning across really easily. And then on the other side with this part, you get what could basically be a meditation, something to sit with, focus on, more of a parable. And I believe the section on the right is more like quotes directly from Osho, but I could be wrong. And to be honest, you guys, I've worked with this deck for however many decades now, and I do not know Osho well. I have in recent months heard that there are some problematic things with Osho himself. To be honest, I'm not at all educated about those. So if that's the kind of thing that you need to know about before picking something like this up, please do read about that first. I know that there are certain people that I can't and won't support now because I found stuff out about them. I really need to look it up. This is not a deck that I use a lot anymore, to be honest. It's more my home deck. But anyways, I really love the way that the guidebook is laid out, and the stories are so memorable. This commentary section, so memorable. Like, look at this card, Isolation. It shows a figure just surrounded by ice, and these tears are starting to melt the ice, and that's what it talks about in the commentary, but this is the card for the Three of Swords. Interesting, right? Now, the suits are slightly different. It is rainbows for earth. It's fire for fire. Water for water, and then clouds for air. And this card, the schizophrenia here is not referring to the mental illness. It is referring to a idea of being torn in a decision, is how it's written in the guidebook. Now, the other thing to know about this deck is that it comes with a 79th card, which is called the Master, which is a picture of Osho. And along with the book that I pitched like 20 plus years ago, I also pitched that card. It didn't feel right to me to have like the author in the deck. And nowadays that would be something that would probably prevent me from even buying a deck, is just knowing that card's in there. But I just pitched it. I never missed it. The first week or two I had the deck, I think I tried to leave it in there, and it just bugged me every time it came up. It was like, no, this isn't right, so I took it out. Now, speaking of the readings, or the spreads that are in this book, the one that stuck to me, sorry, I know I just licked my finger, I'm sorry if that's like freaks you out. Okay, here it is. So the Celtic Cross, as it's depicted in the Osho Zen, became my go-to spread. It's still the spread that I think if I'm ever just like on the fly giving a reading and I just don't know what I want to do, I might still use this. And I can use this even not laid out. I can just literally pull 10 cards and just go, card 1 is, card 2 is, without even laying them out, because I just know this so well. So this is kind of like my home spread, as much as it's kind of overwhelming for most people new to tarot to work with a freaking 10 card spread. This is the one that I learned. Now, I don't really know the traditional Celtic Cross well enough to tell you what all the differences are, but I'll tell you what the positions are. So in the center you have the issue, which I think is the same as traditional. Then you have the crossing card, just says diminishing or enhancing the issue, or clarifying or obscuring the issue, which I think is also similar to tradition. And then some of the cards that surround start to take a slightly different feel. So you have the conscious here, the unconscious here, recent past, and journeys just beginning. So the way that it's written here. So this is actually written as old patterns are the old way and new patterns. And I learned this as journeys that are just coming to an end, journeys just beginning, but it's really just wording. It's still recent past and upcoming future, near future. And then 7 is self, your feelings and attitudes. 8 is what you're attracting from the outside, so external. This is really interesting actually. External influences. So maybe this is traditional. Somebody tell me, is this traditional? And then 9 is desires/denials, and 10 is outcome or key. Here's what's hilarious. This is not how I remember the book being written. Now this is a newer version, but I feel like I remember number 9 being your greatest hope and your greatest fear, which are often the same thing. And that is the exact wording that is stuck in my head all of these years and how I view this card. Usually it's like the thing you want the most but are also afraid of. And that's usually what I talk about in that position. And then 10, it says here outcome/key, but I feel like I remembered in the original guidebook this just saying key to the outcome. So what I liked about this over other versions of the Celtic Cross that I'd seen is that it talks about the key to the outcome. It's not saying this is what's going to happen definitively. It's saying this is the key to get to that next level. And there's something about that I really, really liked. And in fact, there actually is a spread in here called The Key, which is another like big spread. It's got 8 cards. So I now have a copy of the book that I can play with and dive back into. This is more for nostalgia's sake, to be honest. As I said, I don't reach for this deck very often. I do have it in my regular deck rotation, so I will be using it, and probably soonish. I like pairing it with the Tao Oracle. But I love it, and it's home, and it was my first deck, and it's definitely a deck that has stayed with me all of these years. There was a time when I had like 10-ish decks, and then I minimized or decluttered those down to like 3. This was one of the 3, of course, that stayed with me. Not counting my soul decks, my soul cards decks. But for tarot decks, I had like 3, and this was one of the 3 that I kept. This one, the Mystic Fairy. This one, the Mystic Fairy, and there was one other that stayed with me, even at my most minimalist phases. I'm clearly past that phase of my life now, but this is always a mainstay. So, and this is actually, I find, a really fantastic deck for reading people who are non-pagan or who are more aligned with Buddhist philosophies or Zen philosophies or Eastern philosophy. I feel like the artwork is much more accessible. It's because it's so non-traditional in a lot of ways, it doesn't throw people off. There's not a card in here called death, but there are really, all those archetypes are present. They're just presented differently, and yet it's still very balanced. If anything, though, I would say that because it's got a Zen Buddhist philosophy to it, it does have a much, I want to say negative, much more negative slant on the swords. It really sort of, it does kind of portray your mind and your mental thought processes as more adversarial with you. They want, it's got that bias in it, but a lot of decks do that with the sword suit, to be honest, so I guess it's not that far off the mark. But yeah, I just love it. I find it accessible. I think it's great for anybody who's never had a tarot reading and is curious, because it doesn't have that imagery that people have seen in movies and on television, and I love it. It is probably the first one I reach for when I'm reading for somebody brand spanking new to tarot. Although now I have a bunch of others I can also choose from that are equally lovely and non-confronting, like the Spirit Song Tarot and others like that. But anyway, love it. That is my #my first tarot story. I've actually really enjoyed watching a lot of these. I didn't get a chance to comment on as many as I wanted, but I have watched a ton of them. So thank you to Simon for starting this tag. And if you have made a My First Tarot tag, please let me know down below and I can make sure I've watched yours or do watch yours. And if you don't have a channel, no worries. Just let me know what your first tarot deck was and what your experience was like. I would love to hear. And until next time, you guys, I will see you later.